Okay, so now we're on the call and I'll explain a little bit about how the interface looks. So right here is how long the call has been going and when the call started. And there are a few buttons here. So first off, this is the button to open the Advocate dashboard, this blue button that says Open Advocate Dashboard Interaction V2. So if you press it, it's going to open another window that's going to open up the interaction. And it's actually going to open up to the interaction that is connected to the call you're on. You don't have to find it and select it. It automatically opens up that interaction. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. There are a few other buttons here. So there is a button here that says transfer to abusive/prank. So if you happen to be getting a prank call, which does happen sometimes, there's a canned message for it where essentially if you press this, it'll end the call and it will send the contact over to that canned message. So prank calls are usually pretty easy to identify. It's usually things that don't have anything to do with what would be within the scope, and there's giggling. Abusive would be a contact who's routinely disrespecting you, even after setting up boundaries. It's not necessarily like sometimes like it can be uncomfortable to hear a contact use curse words, but like if they're not necessarily used towards you as an advocate, like if they're used in the context of the call when talking about the abuser, that's very different than if they're being disrespectful towards you or using racial slurs, being racist, homophobic. Those are times where it is okay to transfer to abusive. You don't deserve to be treated like that. So again, this would transfer the contact directly to a canned message. It's okay to let the contact know that you're disengaging and that we're here 24/7 if they want to call back in a respective way. But the canned message does explain what's happening. So there's also a button for if the contact is a disruptive contact and they have a protocol. We talk about that in a bit later in training, where essentially like these are contacts that are misusing the line and we'll tell you how to identify them, but there's also a canned message for them. So now we're moving on to the contact demographic bot responses. So essentially, whenever a contact calls, there is a bot that asks them questions about their demographics. Please disregard the part that says gender. We can't ask for gender anymore, so do not ask the contact's gender. Just pretend this isn't there. But so the context race and age, they answer to the bot. It says Hispanic 17, city and state, Austin, Texas. So those are things you could put into the advocate dashboard interaction. And sometimes there's also a caller objective if they're talking about like what they're wanting to call for. But it's always good to, especially if the answers are unclear, you could confirm with the contact, or if they don't answer, you can ask if they're comfortable sharing this demographic information. If they say no, we always want to respect that and not push them for that. It's totally okay for them to decline giving the demographic information, but sometimes they say no to the demographic information being given to the bot, but they might say yes to you. They may just want to get through that bot message. So it's always okay to ask. Just remember that if they say no, that is okay, and you can put it in the database as decline to disclose. So now we'll talk a little bit about the call features. So if you see where my mouse is, again, this is where the time of the call is. So there are a few buttons. So the first one is the dial pad. So the only reason usually that you would be using the dial pad here is to put in the code for the language line. Generally, unless for some reason you're trying to connect to an external resource and it says something like press 1 to get connected, then that's okay. But we wouldn't be using the dial pad to connect to, like, we wouldn't type in the phone number for external resources. We would use the transfer buttons over here for that. So you don't need to use this to put in actual phone numbers, just a heads up. This is just for if you've already dialed the number and there are extra steps you need to take on a dial pad to get connected to the resource. So this is the mute button. So if you press it, you will mute yourself and then you can unmute yourself. So just a heads up that when you put yourself on mute, the caller can't hear you, but we can still hear you in the recording. So if for some reason you're saying things that would not want to be heard and you just put yourself on mute on Genesis, you can still be heard by other people within the organization that would be listening to the recording. So that's definitely something to think about. There usually aren't too many reasons that you would put yourself on mute outside of like emergencies or something. But if you, for some reason, need to, please make sure to let the caller know that you've put yourself on mute. So then the next button is hold, which if you press the pause button, it'll put the caller on hold. It'll be playing hold music for them and it'll say on hold right here. So then you can press the play button again to take them off of hold. Again, there are not too many reasons. You would just use this hold button here and just put them on hold. Usually, like the only reason you would put a caller on hold is if you are speaking to external resources and you would use one of these transfer buttons, which we'll explain later on. And it would put them on hold automatically. So one of the only reasons you would ever use this hold button is if there was some sort of emergency and you would definitely want to let the caller know, like, hey, I'm gonna put you on hold for a second. But a lot of times we would just use the, like, if you need a second to check on something, you could use the language, I'm gonna put you on hold for a second while I check in on X or Y, but you wouldn't usually actually put them on hold in Genesis. You would just take that second for yourself. So the next button here is the secure pause button. So calls are automatically recorded by Genesis, and we always want to ask the contact's consent if it is okay if the call is recorded. So let's say we do ask, hey, is it okay if we call, if this call is recorded, and they say no, we would want to start the secure pause on recording. So once you press this button, the call is no longer being recorded. And this doesn't usually happen. Usually they don't want like the whole call recorded, but let's say they're okay with the call being recorded, then they're like, actually, I don't want this part of the call recorded. So you could put the secure pause on for the part that they don't want recorded and then unpause it if that's what they would want to do. So that's definitely something to think about. Again, usually it's either a yes or no, and like the pause would be on the whole time or off the whole time. But if a contact is like, actually, I just don't want this like 5 minutes, like while I'm telling this part of my story recorded, you can turn the secure pause on and have the recording pause for like that 5 minutes of the story. And then they're like, okay, you can record again. Then you could turn it back off if that was something that would happen. So these three buttons are about transferring, which we'll cover in another video, in the next video in detail, but just a heads up for what they are. And then this button is for ending the call. Generally, the contact would end the call unless they disconnect or like just stop talking or something. But let's say they haven't been speaking for a few minutes and it's clear that like they've lost the call, but the call hasn't disconnected on their end, then after you've tried the correct strategies, you would be able to press end call here. We will give you the full information on exactly when to end the call in those circumstances there, but basically this is the end call button.